I want to go to this mandate before we go to before I bring my last guest in. First off, I know a lot of people are dealing with this. Okay, I know a lot of folks are wrestling with this because I've gotten a lot of emails, I've gotten phone calls from friends and others who are now caught up into this this mandate web, and of course the court providing some potential relief. We'll see where this goes. In fact, this week on our Pray Vote stand on Wednesday night that we do every week, as we spend a little time praying about some of these issues, going a little deeper, we're going to be focused on this mandate and how Christians should approach it. I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm concerned about a mandate, and I think it's an overreach. And here's one of the reasons why. This weekend on George Stephanopoulos, This Week with George Stephanopoulos, this was yesterday, Martha Raddatz was the host, and she had the Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, and was asked about how far might the Biden administration go. Play clip number 4.
And Dr. Murthy, if the law survives legal challenges, will the administration be extending the mandate to smaller employers with fewer than 100 employees?
Well, Martha, certainly nothing is off the table at this moment, but the focus right now is on implementing the current rule that OSHA put out.
Nothing is off the table. Those are the operative words. We see this now with this push with some areas to mandate this now for children, now that the shot has been approved for tots, shots for tots. Where will the mandates end? I think we're right to be concerned. I'm thankful for the state leaders that are pushing back and private entities that are caught up into this web that are also suing. I think this was also a part of what happened last week in Virginia and elsewhere, where there was major pushback against the agenda of the Republicans. Now we're hearing the Democrats saying, well, it's just because the Democratic agenda got derailed in Washington and they weren't able to get these big spending bills through. But now that they've got this one through, the future looks good for them. Well, let's take a look at what actually the American people are thinking. And joining me to talk about this is Scott Rasmussen, founder of ScottRasmussen.com, and he is the editor-at-large at Ballotpedia. Scott, welcome back to the program.
Great to be with you, Tony. Lots to talk about these days.
A whole lot. Where do you want to start?
Well, I would start by saying the mandate issue is part of the reason that Glenn Youngkin is the governor-elect in Virginia. People, if we poll and say, do you favor or oppose this mandate, you get very soft support. Just over half the people say, yeah, I kind of like it. But that's really just virtue signaling. They're saying they like the idea of vaccination. When you push a little further, you find that 39% of voters say they know somebody who, if this all goes forward, will have to get vaccinated against their will because they can't afford to lose their job. Now, if somebody is getting vaccinated against their will or afraid that's going to happen, they're really angry. They're going to vote. They're going to go talk to other people. And that is one of the sleeper issues that's involved here.
Now, we also saw rising to the top of the issue set in Virginia was education. Now, this is not an issue that is historically seen as a Republican issue, or at least valuable to Republicans. That's usually a Democratic issue. But in this case, a quarter of the voters in some of the polling that I saw identified education as their top issue. And I think 3/4 of those broke for Glenn Youngkin. Is this something that's isolated to Virginia, or are we seeing this elsewhere across the country?
Oh, absolutely not limited to Virginia. I think we need to be clear about what it is that's happening, though. This is not about what some people are calling critical race theory. It's not about, one particular issue. It is about an attitude that says, parents, stay away. You're not involved in your children's schooling. And I think, look, at the moment that Terry McAuliffe made that statement about parents shouldn't be telling the schools what to teach their children, I tweeted out that that's the definition of a debate gaffe. But what was truly remarkable about it is that McAuliffe and the Democrats just didn't pick up on it. So I think we're going to see this in lots of places. And again, it's important. What we're talking about here is parents want to have a say in their children's education. They want to see all the curriculum, all the books, because they should.
Right. I mean, my take on this, obviously coming from a particular perspective in talking to a particular group of people, I know that's not reflective of the entire country. I think the broader concern is what you've identified here. I think many parents are concerned about the subject matter, the curriculum on critical race theory, the gender bathrooms that led to this assault of a girl there in Loudoun County. But I think the bigger issue is what you pointed to. It was the response when parents went to the school boards and said, hey, what's going on? And there was this level of arrogance that was, I mean, I watched hours of these various school board meetings and was stunned at the arrogance that was targeted at parents, basically saying, we know better than you what your kids need.
Yeah, and what's amazing about this is school boards begin with a tremendous amount of goodwill. People, you don't normally wake up and get angry at a school board member. They're donating their time in most cases, and they're trying to do something. It takes a lot to get them angry, and we've been seeing a lot thrown this way. And it's really important that we talk about this in terms of, appropriate. School boards have a role. We can't deny that. They should have a role. It's part of our system of governance. However, parents need to have the ultimate say in what their children are taught. And what we're seeing here, I think, is getting to this idea that parents are starting to wake up and say, we had all these kids locked down last year. We saw what was going on. We're not quite sure we like it. It's not, I would never use the term critical race theory to describe what's happening, because most parents don't know what that means. Right, However, in Virginia, 3 out of 4 voters believe that America was founded on the noble ideals of freedom, equality, and self-governance. They reject the idea that it was founded on racism and white supremacy. If you put it in those terms, parents know the way they want their history to be taught. It's a truthful history that acknowledges our flaws, but we are a good nation and with a great history. And if we continue to pursue our founding ideals, we have a greater future. That's what people want taught. And to the degree that some members of the educational world want to do something else, there's going to be a lot of pushback.
So, Scott, we often talk about intensity in polling, because that numbers are one thing, but the intensity of those numbers are something else. When you look at what is unfolding right now, as you said, this is not isolated to Virginia. You've got parents engaged all across the country. I think there was some like 80 school board races or so last week. What's the intensity level? How would you juxtapose the intensity level now to what we saw, say, 10 years ago with the rise of the Tea Party movement?
In a lot of ways, very similar. The most motivated voters, the people who can't wait for the 2022 midterm elections to come around, are people who support the policies of former President Donald Trump. They are fired up. They are excited. Bernie Sanders supporters, traditional Democrats, traditional Republicans, not so much. The Sanders wing of the party is not quite sure that they like the Manchin wing of the party. There's a lot of cross currents, and a lot of Democrats are getting frustrated that despite winning the White House and nominal control of Congress, they haven't got all that much done.
Last week, Democratic political strategist James Carville from my home state of Louisiana was asked on PBS NewsHour about the election results. And he essentially, when asked what went wrong, he said, what went wrong is stupid wokeness. Do you think he's got his finger on something?
Absolutely. Look, if you look at the election returns in the rural areas, turnout was up higher than anybody thought possible. And the margins for Republicans, not just in Virginia, but all around the country, were up. The suburban voters, who some of them were turned off by President Trump, but they were even more turned off by what we saw in that arrogance about school issues and other things. If the Democrats are losing rural voters by huge numbers, and it is because of the woke, politically correct agenda, and if they're losing the suburban voters, or even if they're just breaking even on suburban voters, there's not enough people in the cities to make up for that. If the election were held today, I would guess the Republicans would pick up 50 seats in the House and 3 or 4 in the Senate. Now, election's a year away, so that could change. But the dynamics are very bad for the Democrats right now.
Well, let's talk about that. You've been tracking the president's approval rating. Give us the latest on what the president's approval rating is and the trajectory that you see.
Right now, he's in the low 40% range. We've done a lot of polling, and we end up 42, 43, 44% type of range among registered voters. But again, you talk about intensity. Our last survey showed that 19% of voters strongly approved of the job President Biden is doing. 40% strongly disapprove. The trajectory is not good. I don't know if it's stabilized. I mean, presidents have a base. Their party will stick with them unless things get really bad. So I don't expect the president's numbers will slip much lower. It's even possible they could come back if the economy picks up next year, but they will never get back to where they were, in the above 50% range.
Now, I've read a number of stories that say, well, his approval rating is as low as Donald Trump's approval rating. But the intensity level of the support, the strong support that Donald Trump had, if I'm not mistaken, was a much bigger portion than what Joe Biden enjoys.
Well, ultimately, yes. But at this point in his first term, the numbers were pretty similar to Joe Biden's. There was a lot of concern. And so I think it would be a mistake to say one or the other is better in terms of their approval ratings at this point. The challenge for President Biden is going to be to figure out a way to turn this around because the issues that the Democrats had banked on are simply not popular. And we noticed something very interesting. It's perhaps the beginning of a trend. People are now beginning to get more optimistic about putting the pandemic behind us, but they're becoming more pessimistic about the economy. That hasn't happened in the last year and a half. When people felt better about the pandemic, they felt better about the economy. I think what's happening for the Biden administration, causing them real problems, are things like the supply chain issues and the sharp inflation that people are seeing. Remember, for somebody who lives paycheck to paycheck, if you put $20 of extra in your gas tank each week, that's $20 less to spend on groceries.
Right. If you can get those groceries with the supply chain issues. I played this clip earlier, but I just see this as spin. This was the president's chief of staff, Ron Klain, that was on Meet the Press that aired yesterday. Play clip number 5 again, please.
Well, look, I do think the voters sent a message on Tuesday. They wanted to see more action in Washington. They wanted to see things move more quickly. And 3 days later, Congress responded, passing the president's infrastructure bill.
Is that what voters want, more of the leftist policies of the Biden administration?
First off, most voters weren't paying attention. I was tracking that bill. There was no outcry for or against this legislation. It was a big deal in Washington, but among most voters, it was a non-event. And I think people's eyes glaze over after a while. We spent $1 trillion here, $3 trillion there, and they can't keep track. Right. The idea that passing that bill is going to turn things around is ridiculous. Doing something about inflation, doing something about the supply chains, doing something, to address the crisis at the southern border, those are issues that would draw attention and have an impact. But we don't see any serious effort to address those issues.
I mean, for the most part, Scott, most people pay attention to those things that directly affect them.
Right.
And unfortunately, though, some of these policies in the long run do have significant impact. Well, you said inflation, you look at rising prices, you look at the supply chain disruptions. It's a lot of the policies that are coming out of Washington, D.C. that affect those things that ultimately filter down to the people. Scott, we're out of time, but it's always great to talk with you. Always interested in what you are seeing, people are thinking, and the trends that we see out there. So thanks so much for taking time to join us today.
Thank you. Look forward to joining you again.